Hey there, I'm Jill Griffin, and this is the Career Refresh Podcast. Hey friends, today I want to talk about my grandmother because the day this podcast launches, she is 100. 100 years old, friends. That is some good American Ukrainian stock. She's always believed in movement and eating well, but I wanted to share a bit of her story and talk about some of the memories that have really shaped and impacted my life. And when I was thinking about her as we're well on our way to planning what we're going to be doing with her, is that there are some major themes that have popped out in her life. And that's service, creativity, health, family, friends, and mindset. So digging into the first theme is service. She worked in a boarding house in Jamaica, Queens that her mother ran, and she always made sure that the tenants were cared for, whether it was a warm meal, friendly conversation, because many of those tenants were new immigrants to the United States. And she was doing this as a teenager. I believe it was as young as 12 or 13 that she was, cleaning the rooms, changing bed linens, making sure cooking meals for the tenants, the things that would be done in a boarding house back then. And having someone, I think, that just sort of understood your journey and knew a bit about what you were going to go through and lending a warm ear. I just imagine like that level of service was just a relief to so many travelers and people. She eventually met my grandfather at this boarding house, and like many people her age, she didn't have a very long formal education, but her learning never stopped. She eventually got jobs, both of them actually got jobs as factory workers in a bookbinding factory, Country Line Press, for anyone who knows New York history. They were a book publisher on Long Island. They even had a train stop on the Long Island Railroad, which of course made it really easier for many of the workers from New York City and the boroughs to be able to get out to Long Island to have employment. And there they always were connected to their colleagues and community, again, being of service. There was always a casserole prepared if someone had lost a spouse or had a child sick. We were always talking about these things. And my grandfather passed away in, I think it was like 1994. And I remember that a man from the factory showed up at the funeral home. He was a new employee way back when, and he remembered my grandparents and how loving they were to each other, but also how kind they were and how they were always being of service to their fellow workers. I mean, this is like 40 years post-retirement. I mean, this guy had to be 16 or 17 years old when he first started working there. So I just remember him coming in saying that he saw the notice on the in the employee cafeteria on the community bulletin board. And he was like, wow, I remember those people. I'm going to show up for them the way they showed up for me. And he told me that day. I just think about that. And I'm like, talk about building connection and community based on service. The next theme is creativity. So because it was bookbinding, there was always extra paper, and the employees were allowed to take the scraps of paper as they were in the big cutting machines. So my grandparents had always made weird shaped paper, and then they would make pads out of it. And my grandmother was always bringing it to us that we had, places to draw, or if we were at their house, they were always the wackiest shaped pads, but it was awesome because it was like really good cardstock because it's book cardstock. So we had things that, we could paint on and it wouldn't sink through and ruin her like wood table. Again, just a sweet memory of her creativity and like playing with all the different shapes of pads. Also, her love of travel and exploring, definitely the idea that America's backyard is our national parks and making sure that we did that and traveled and saw. I mean, now I've been to 49 states and over 50 countries, but back then I was one of very few that had the opportunity to travel by car and by camper or tent to travel across the United States and really see the beautiful country that we live in. Her love of nature, she had a garden that was like crazy big. And I just remember even like her creativity of what she would make coming from the garden. And of course, I always remember those grilled cheese and tomato sandwiches. Also, her creativity, I think, came up through food, and because she was Ukrainian American, making pierogies, or in our family, because we were creating the varnaki, right? Those little potato and cheese filled, or some families use other stuffing to fill those little dumplings. And she had committed to memory the recipe. And thankfully, my mom and my aunt would trail her at one point to measure everything that she was doing to make sure that they got that recipe down. And yes, we have the recipe, everyone. So every year, multiple generations get together, my family, to make and enjoy these pierogies. So yes, it's creativity. It's also the theme of family. She was always crocheting and I have so many memories of her trying to teach me making blankets, again, of scraps of yarn. So they were the craziest colors, things that you probably wouldn't necessarily want to put together today. But you know what? They were warm and beautifully stitched. She was making Christmas ornaments, drink coasters. I mean, I even have a box to cover my tissues that's crocheted, right? So really funny. Don't use it all, but I honor it and I have it in a box. She even made me a baby blanket with a bonnet, and knowing that I was child free. But as she said to me, she was giving it to me so that someday I could give it to a child or family that was special, because she has 13 grandchildren, right? She didn't want to she didn't want to leave anybody out and have any of her grandchildren not have what she was making. So her creativity has always been something that I've chuckled at. It's fun, it's light, it's loose, it's playful, and something that has really helped me see things through a different lens. And when I'm creating, whether that's strategy or, a course or a client campaign, just always making sure that whatever it is, to wear it light and be able to stay in the flow of that. The next area that I would comment on was health. And as I mentioned, from her garden and her home cooking, she was big on homemade food. She also was big on movement. And, she was doing jazzercise before it was like a thing. She biked and roller skated well into her 70s. She broke one arm falling off the bike. And when that healed, she went roller skating, and guess what? She broke the other arm, which is kind of funny. But she is active. She lives life. She keeps her mind active. She loves games. Loves board games, loves card games, is always big for, getting out the pennies and nickels and playing a little poker at the family table around events. And, it's only recently that she's now in a nursing home, but she really is an example of what's possible. I mean, this woman has the strongest microbiome, because now today it's like white Zinfandel and sugar, and she's fine. I mean, she's 100. It's funny. And then friends and family, like I said, 13 grandchildren. She's basically responsible for 29 people when you add in the great-grandchildren. And then when you add in the spouses and significant others, we're a family of 60 and counting that's all led by this matriarch. And support, security, love were all the foundations of what I was raised with. She was an active member of her community, and whether that was a church or a local organization, she really believed that strong communities were so important because they were bringing social connection and the sense of belonging, which again, I think came back from those early days working in the boarding house with tenants. And, participating in community, really making sure that, people were sharing values. She was always seen working with a small child and teaching them something, whether, again, it was at any of the community organizations, but just kind of bringing a lot of joy. She was always making casserole or bringing food over to a family who could use a warm meal. Again, really just that family, friends, community was such an important thread through her life. And the last area that I have learned from her was mindset. For her, it was connected to her church and her Christian belief system. She never missed mass. And my gosh, she volunteered from everything from like the bake sale to whatever the community pancake breakfast was. But I do remember in my first year of high school, I failed math that summer. And I was, obviously devastated because it meant that I still needed to work, I needed to study, and I also wanted to have fun. But I spent many weeks of that summer living at her house because she was closer to the school that I had to go to take the summer school classes. It was that dang New York State sequential mathematics. Anyway, so I lived in her house for a few weeks that summer. And I just remember every single day as I would work my way out of the house, get ready and go to school, she would remind me that I was smart, that I could do anything. She always told me that that I had such presence and that I was fun and that people wanted to be around me. And like, it's not always important of what you remember, but it's important about what you made and how you make people feel and that sense of belonging. And while teachers and classmates were like, oh, you failed, to her, it was never about failure. Her thoughts on failure is really what gives me my belief today of like, all right, I guess there's another way to do it. And whatever that it is, achieve it, win it, fix it, go after it. It's just not that big of a deal. And she taught me to really wear it like a loose garment and that there were many other things that I excelled at. So if this was one area that I didn't do so great at, it's no big deal. And just for grounding purposes, because until like thinking about this episode and honoring my grandmother, I kind of forgot about failing math in freshman year. But I went on to lead campaigns, budgets, and divisions of companies that were well over $100 million. And there was never a problem. Okay, people, so don't worry. All is well. And listen, my grandmother's life was not without pain, disappointment, hardship, grief. And I'm not going to go into any of those details, but what she gave me was a huge belief in possibility. And it's really what anchors my belief system today, which has served me well as I continue to strive for and create what's possible. So friends, honor the wisdom around you wherever you find it in whatever forms, okay? That wisdom is priceless. Have a great week. And here's to possibility. Hey, thanks for listening to the Career Refresh podcast. If you're enjoying this and you want more information, go to my website, jillgriffincoaching.com. There you can find information on how to work with me one-on-one or my group programs, or even bring me into your workplace. I'll put the link to my website in the show notes. But hey, listen, before you go, do me a favor, rate and review this podcast because it definitely helps me get the word out to people everywhere so that they can also thrive in the workplace. All right, friends, I appreciate you. I'll see you soon.